Petrograd, November 1917. The city was still burning with revolution. In the Smolny Institute, under flickering lamps, men shouted over maps and manifestos, and among them stood Grigory Zinoviev, short, sharp-eyed, his beard streaked with frost. He was one of Lenin's oldest allies, the man who had stood beside him in exile, who had fled with him, starved with him, dreamed with him. When Lenin spoke, Zinoviev finished his sentences. When Lenin hesitated, Zinoviev carried the flag. Now the revolution was theirs. He became head of the Petrograd Soviet, the Red Capital. He gave speeches that electrified crowds, called himself the voice of October. Lenin trusted him. Even Trotsky respected him, grudgingly. And among the quiet observers in the background was a man named Joseph Jugashvili, Stalin, taking notes, saying little. When Lenin fell ill in 1922, the struggle began before his body was cold. 3 men closed ranks around power: Stalin, Kamenev, and Zinoviev, the triumvirate. They swore loyalty to Lenin's legacy. They spoke of unity, of safeguarding the revolution. But every meeting was a knife fight behind polite smiles. Zinoviev fancied himself the orator of the 3, Stalin, the organizer, Kamenev, the thinker, Zinoviev, the voice. He believed he could control Stalin. Everyone did, at first. He once told Kamenev over vodka, "Joseph is dull but loyal. He'll follow." Kamenev nodded. Neither man saw the trap closing around them. Because Stalin wasn't following. He was counting. Counting enemies. Counting allies. Counting the days until he ruled alone. And when Lenin died in January 1924, the first count was complete. Stalin stood beside the coffin, calm, composed. Zinoviev spoke at the funeral, tears streaming down his face. But the crowd didn't listen to Zinoviev's trembling words. They watched Stalin, the silent mourner, the man who seemed unshakable. By the end of that week, the balance had shifted. Lenin's body was embalmed. Zinoviev's fate was not, but it might as well have been. By 1925, the revolution had devoured its romance. The slogan still rang out, "Workers of the world, unite." But the applause had grown nervous, mechanical. Power had moved from the streets to the offices, from the people to the party, and from the party to one man's desk. Zinoviev saw it happening. He just didn't believe it would happen to him. For years, he had helped Stalin isolate Trotsky, accusing him of arrogance, of anti-party deviation. Together, they had forced him out of power. But when Trotsky was gone, Zinoviev realized too late that the next target was himself. At a Central Committee meeting that spring, Stalin sat silently as Zinoviev spoke, passionate, trembling, desperate to remind the party who he was. "Comrades," Zinoviev said, his hands shaking, "the revolution is not one man. It is a collective. It must remain that way." The room was quiet. Stalin looked up slowly, his face unreadable. "Of course, Comrade Zinoviev," he said, "no one man should rule. That is why we rely on discipline and obedience." The applause came, not for Zinoviev. Soon after, the newspapers began printing strange phrases: factionalism in Leningrad, deviations from Leninism, Everyone knew what that meant. Zinoviev's power base, the Leningrad Party, was being dismantled piece by piece. His loyalists were dismissed, demoted, or arrested. Meetings that once began with his name now began with Stalin's. At home, Zinoviev's wife, Zlata Lilina, begged him to stop speaking out. "They'll destroy you," she whispered. He shook his head. "They wouldn't dare. I built this party." But he was wrong. In December 1925, at the 14th Party Congress, Stalin's men packed the hall. When Zinoviev rose to speak, there was no applause. When Stalin spoke, there was thunder. By the end of the session, Zinoviev had lost everything: his seat on the Politburo, his authority in Leningrad, his voice. Stalin didn't need to shout. He simply leaned forward and said, "History, comrade, has no patience for hesitation." And with that, Zinoviev was finished, though the execution would take years to complete. When power leaves a man in Stalin's Russia, it doesn't walk away, it's ripped from him. By 1927, Grigory Zinoviev had become a ghost in the movement he once commanded. His name was removed from party resolutions. His speeches were erased from archives. Even photographs were retouched. His face brushed out, replaced by empty background. The revolution he had helped ignite was now erasing him pixel by pixel. He lived quietly in a modest Moscow apartment under surveillance. 2 NKVD men were always nearby, one across the street, one in the building lobby. They didn't hide. They didn't have to. Zinoviev tried to write memoirs, essays, letters to the Central Committee, all pleading the same thing. "Let me serve again. Let me prove my loyalty." No answer came. His former comrades avoided him on the street. Even his old ally, Lev Kamenev, stopped visiting. When they did meet, it was in whispers, curtains drawn. They spoke of the revolution as if it were a dead relative, too painful to remember, too dangerous to forget. In 1932, he was allowed to return to party membership, a gesture of mercy, or perhaps bait. He took it eagerly, writing a public confession. "I was mistaken in opposing the Central Committee. I now fully support Comrade Stalin." He signed it trembling, his hand barely steady enough to hold the pen. When the announcement was printed in Pravda, Stalin smiled faintly. To the party, it was proof that even the proud could repent. To Stalin, it was proof that they could kneel. For a brief time, Zinoviev believed he was safe again. He attended lectures, taught political theory, and kept his voice low. But the air in Moscow had changed, thicker, colder. By 1934, even loyal men began disappearing. Then came Kirov's murder in Leningrad, December 1st, 1934. A single gunshot in a hallway. A single excuse for a purge. Within hours, Stalin claimed it was a conspiracy, a plot by the old opposition. He didn't say names at first. He didn't have to. Zinoviev's was the first everyone thought of. That night, 2 black cars stopped outside his apartment. He was calm when they knocked. He'd known this was coming. He put on his old coat, took one last look at the photograph of Lenin on his wall, and said quietly, "Perhaps now history will remember me for something." He didn't resist when they handcuffed him. At the Lubyanka, the guards didn't call him comrade anymore. He was simply prisoner 341. And for the first time in years, Zinoviev realized what he had once refused to see. In Stalin's world, even repentance was a crime. The courtroom smelled of sweat, smoke, and fear. The chandeliers glowed too brightly. The air was heavy with rehearsed outrage. On the benches sat party delegates, foreign journalists, soldiers, all summoned to witness not justice, but theater. At the center of it all sat Grigory Zinoviev, pale, sunken-eyed, a shadow of the man who once thundered from the podiums of Petrograd. His co-defendant, Lev Kamenev, sat beside him, silent, gaunt, his hands clasped like a man already praying for mercy that would never come. They were accused of everything: plotting with Trotsky, conspiring to kill Stalin, undermining the state, poisoning the revolution itself. It didn't matter that none of it was true. The verdict had been written before the trial began. From a small balcony above, Stalin watched through a slit in the curtain, not officially present, but present enough. He smoked quietly, taking in the spectacle below. Every confession, every trembling plea was a victory not of law, but of control. When the prosecutor, Andrei Vyshinsky, rose, his voice cut through the air like a blade. These men are vipers in the bosom of the revolution, traitors who hid behind Lenin's name while plotting his destruction. They do not deserve life, only the people's wrath. The audience erupted on cue. Zinoviev flinched, but did not lift his head. He had been broken long before this day. Weeks of interrogation, the endless lights, the threats to his family, the careful mix of brutality and persuasion had done their work. The NKVD didn't need torture anymore. They had learned patience. They convinced him that his confession would save his wife and sons. That one last act of loyalty would redeem him. So, when his turn came, Zinoviev stood slowly, eyes hollow, and said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, I am guilty. I was part of a counter-revolutionary organization. I lost faith in the party, in Comrade Stalin. But I ask for mercy, not for me, but for my family." A murmur rippled through the room. Vyshinsky smiled thinly. "The Soviet people are merciful, Comrade Zinoviev. But history is not." The next morning, Pravda ran the headline, "Traitors exposed. Zinoviev and Kamenev confessed to plot against the state." Stalin's portrait filled the front page, the silent guarantor of justice. Foreign correspondents sent dispatches describing the spectacle as astonishing. Some believed the confessions, others pretended to. But inside Moscow, everyone understood. If Zinoviev could fall, anyone could. That night, in his cell, Zinoviev asked the guard for a cigarette. He smoked it slowly, then whispered, "Tell them I still believed in the revolution." The guard said nothing. At 1:15 a.m., August 25, 1936, a truck left the Lubyanka prison courtyard. Inside were Zinoviev, Kamenev, and 14 others. At a secret location near Moscow, they were shot one by one. There were no last words recorded, no graves marked. Their bodies vanished into the machinery of the purge, just another entry in a ledger, Another victory for Stalin's version of history. After Zinoviev's execution, Moscow grew quieter. Not peaceful, never that, but quiet in the way a graveyard is quiet after the last shovel of dirt falls. Stalin didn't speak Zinoviev's name again. He didn't need to. The trial had done its work. It had taught the country how to believe what it was told, and to fear what it couldn't prove. Within weeks, Pravda published lists of accomplices, hundreds of names. By winter, the lists became thousands. Each name was a warning, each arrest a whisper that reached someone new. If Zinoviev was guilty, then no one is innocent. The party that once boasted of unity now ran on suspicion. Secretaries denounced their bosses, wives informed on husbands, poets stopped writing altogether. People learned to speak in fragments, never full sentences, never certainties. Even silence felt dangerous. In the Kremlin, Stalin moved with the slow calm of a man who had all the time in the world. He called it cleansing. Every garden, he told Molotov one evening, needs pruning. Even the beautiful branches, if they grow in the wrong direction. Molotov nodded. He always nodded. That same week, hundreds of former Zinoviev supporters were rounded up. Old revolutionaries, professors, engineers. The NKVD called them Zinovievites. Most had never met the man. The ripple spread outward. Zinoviev's confession became the foundation of the Great Terror, the justification for every new trial, every execution that followed. Bukharin, Rykov, Radek, all dragged into the same theater, all reciting the same lines Zinoviev had been forced to speak. By 1938, Stalin had achieved what he always wanted: a party without memory, a revolution without witnesses. One night, Stalin asked his secretary for the transcript of the 1936 trial. He read it slowly, his finger tracing Zinoviev's final words. Then he said, almost to himself, "He was clever, that one. But not clever enough." He folded the paper, set it aside, and poured himself a glass of Georgian wine. Outside, Moscow's streets were empty, the snow falling in silence, just as it had the night Zinoviev first pledged his loyalty to him years before. And somewhere beneath that snow, buried in the soil of a city built on fear, lay the story of a man who once thought he could share power with a dictator, and learned too late that Stalin shared nothing, not loyalty, not mercy, not even memory.